Hello everybody, I'm Umesh Singh, Department of English, DAV PG College, Varanasi. In my previous video, I had discussed the definition of communication skill, its types and how to develop communication skill. In the present video, I'm going to discuss the process of communication, then the barriers to communication and formal and informal communication. Now students, as far as this video is concerned, this video is for all the students of communicative English irrespective of their categories. So students, let us discuss the process of communication. Now communication process, and communication is a continuous process which mainly involves three elements: sender, message and receiver. And the elements involved in the communication process are sender. The first one is the sender, who sends the message, and he is the source of the very message, and he starts the communication. The second one is the message. It is the idea, information, view, fact, feeling, etc. that is generated by the sender and is then intended to be communicated further. And yes, as far as message is concerned, it is the idea, information, thoughts and views and feelings of the sender. Encoding. The message generated by the sender is encoded symbolically, such as in the form of words, pictures, gestures, etc. before it is being conveyed. Now, encoding is the process through which the speaker or the sender conceives the message, he forms the message, he visualizes the message, and then he intends to send the same to the receiver. Now, when the message is formed, then the sender selects a medium through which he intends to send the message. Sorry. It is the manner in which the encoded message is transmitted. The message may be transmitted orally or in writing. The medium of communication includes telephone, internet, post, fax, email, etc. Now, these are some of the examples of the medium, like telephone, internet, post, fax, email, etc. Now, through these mediums, the message can be sent to the receiver, and it is the choice of the sender, and the sender actually selects the medium through which he wants to send his message. Now, decoding. Now, when the message is received by the receiver, he decodes the message, he breaks the message into simpler forms, and then he tries to understand it. And when he understands the message, then he tries to send a feedback to the sender. And then the receiver is the person who receives the message sent by the sender. Now, when the receiver receives the message, he tries to understand it, he breaks it into simpler forms, and he then starts acting accordingly. And after that, he sends a feedback to the sender. Now, feedback. Once the receiver confirms to the sender that he has received the message and understood it, the process of communication is complete. Now, when the receiver understands the message, then he decides to send a feedback, a response to the sender. And when the sender receives the feedback, then he is convinced that the process of communication is over and the goal involved in the process has been properly achieved. And then noise, it refers to any obstruction that is caused by the sender, message or receiver during the process of communication. For example, bad telephone connection, faulty encoding, faulty decoding, inattentive receiver, poor understanding of message due to prejudice or inappropriate gestures, etc. Obviously, when the telephone is not functioning properly, then it might create noise. When there is a faulty encoding, faulty decoding, or when the receiver is not paying attention at all to the message, or when the parties involved in the process of communication are not understanding the message properly, then it amounts to noise. Now this is a flow chart through which I'm going to explain the process of communication to you. And this is the flow chart. And in this flow chart, sender is at the top. Now sender is the person who initiates the communication, who conceives the communication, who decides to send a communication or the message to the receiver. Now, sender encodes or conceives the message, he forms the message, he visualizes the message in his mind, and then he gives it a shape to the message. And when the message takes shape, then the sender selects a medium or channel through which he wants that his message should be communicated to the receiver or should be sent to the receiver. And then the message reaches to the receiver, and when the receiver receives the message, he starts decoding it, he starts breaking it into simpler forms, and after that he decides to send a feedback to the sender. And the moment the feedback reaches to the sender, then the sender finds himself in a position to understand that whether the message has been transmitted properly to the receiver or not, or whether the process of communication has been done properly or not. Now, when he gets the feedback, he is convinced that the process of communication has been followed out properly, and the goal also has been achieved in the process. Now, formal communication. Formal communication are the one which flows through the official channels designed in the organizational chart. It may take place between a superior and a subordinate and a superior, or among the same cadre, employees or managers. These communications can be oral or in writing and are generally recorded and filed in the office. Formal communication may be further classified as vertical communication and horizontal communication. So formal communications is actually done through official channels, and it can take place between subordinate and superior, and between superior and subordinate, and also among the peers and equals. Means it can also take place between managers, between the bosses, between the directors, etc. Now, vertical communications, as the name suggests, flow vertically upwards or downwards through formal channels. Upward communication refers to the flow of communication from a subordinate to a superior, whereas downward communication flows from a superior to a subordinate. Now, vertical communication, okay, now, when the communication flows from downward to upward, means when a subordinate talks to his superior, then this one is a downward, this one is an upward communication. And when a superior talks to a subordinate, then this one is a downward communication. And as far as in fact examples are concerned, they are leave, submission of progress report, request for loans, etc. are some of the examples of upward communication. Sending notice to employees to attend a meeting, delegating work to the subordinates, informing them about the company policies, etc. are some examples of downward communication. Obviously, when managers are communicating with their staff, then it will amount to downward communication. And now let us discuss the third one, which is horizontal communication. And this is also known as lateral communication. And lateral communication actually takes place between the peers or the equals, means to say when managers interact among themselves actually amount to lateral communication. When the bosses actually start communicating among themselves, it amounts to lateral communication. Informal communication, any communication that takes place without following the formal channels of communication is said to be informal communication. The informal communication is often referred to as the grapevine, as it spreads rapidly throughout the organization, leading to rumors. Now, students, informal communication, when we talk to our friends and relatives in an informal manner, it leads to informal communication. And for that, we do not require any formal channel. And gossip or grapevine is a classic example of informal communication, and it spreads very rapidly, and finally it assumes the shape of rumors, which is difficult to contain or control. Now let us discuss barriers to communication. The communication barriers may prevent communication or carry incorrect meaning, due to which misunderstandings may be created. Therefore, it is essential for a manager to identify such barriers and take appropriate measures to overcome them. The barriers to communication in organizations can be broadly grouped as follows. Now, the first one is the semantic barriers. Now, students, as far as barriers are concerned, they act as hurdles, and in the presence of such barriers, it is not possible to carry out the process of communication properly. So the sooner we get rid of the barriers, the better. Now, in this category, semantic barriers is the first one. Now, semantic means language. Now, when such barriers result due to use of wrong words, faulty translations, different interpretations. Yes, if the speaker is using wrong words while communicating with others, then it will amount to semantic barrier. Then faulty translations, if the translations are not done properly and correctly, then it will lead to semantic barrier. And then if the interpretations of the message are not done in a proper manner, then it will lead to semantic barriers. Then the second one is psychological barriers. Now, emotional or psychological factors also act as barriers to communication. Thus, at the time of communication, both the sender and the receiver need to be psychologically sound. Yes, while communicating with others, both the parties involved in the process of communication need to be psychologically sound, psychologically fit. Then only the process of communication will flow smoothly and properly. Then the third one is organizational barriers. In an organization with a highly centralized and authoritative pattern, people may not be encouraged to have free communication. Also, rigid rules and regulations may also become a hurdle to communication. Now, authoritative pattern and centralized pattern in any organization will act as a barrier to the free flow process of communication. And also, if any organization is having rigid rules, tough rules, then the process of communication cannot flow properly. So in order to have a proper communication, it is very important to get rid of such barriers. Means to say, the rules and regulations need to be very flexible in a company or in an office or in an institution, so that the flow of communication be okay and proper. And yes, authoritative pattern must be get away with. Then only we can imagine free flow of communication in any organization. Then the fourth one is personal barriers. The personal factors such as ego, biased approach of both sender and receiver may act as a barrier to effective communication. Now, biased approach of the employee, or when the employee of any organization are having ego, then the process of communication cannot take place properly in that organization. So it is very important to break these barriers in an organization. Means to say, the employee must not be biased, they must not have any ego. Okay, then only the bosses of the company can ensure free flow of communication. Then only the process of communication will flow properly and smoothly and openly. So barriers are very important, and while communicating, it is very important to keep into account these barriers, and we need to get rid of these barriers as early as possible to ensure free flow of communication, to ensure proper communication in an organization. Okay, thank you.